Good morning. My name is Ganiyat Sadiq, and I'm the Advocacy Officer for Justice for All Canada, a nonprofit based on preventing genocide globally, with consultative role at the United Nations. We are gathered on the unceded, unsurrendered land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin. Today, on the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, Justice for All Canada is launching a report of profound importance titled Palestine, Genocide, Apartheid, and Occupation: How Islamophobia and Anti-Palestinian Racism Have Led to the Genocide and Persecution of Palestinians, prepared by our Human Rights Policy Analyst, Aidan Alexio. The report details a 76-year-long distressing reality, a reality marked by the systematic persecution of Palestinians through mass killings, displacement, military occupation, and a discriminatory legal regime. It is a reality where the imposition of an oppressive system by the Israeli government against Palestinians has been deemed an apartheid by varying UN experts, international organizations, and civil society groups, both within Palestine and Israel. The United Nations Day to Combat Islamophobia is a reminder of our collective responsibility to combat Islamophobia. It's not just about acknowledging the widespread prejudices that lead to dehumanization, hate, and persecution. It is about actively working together to dismantle these harmful ideologies. Ingrained prejudices drive the Israeli government's war on Gaza and is a core strategy of dehumanizing Palestinians, making the tragic loss of civilian lives a justified outcome for some officials. Statements by prominent Israeli figures casting the conflict in terms of light versus darkness or humanity versus barbarism reveal a disturbing narrative. In the wake of the brutal murder of the Afzal family, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stated, quote, "Islamophobia is real. Hatred has consequences, and it must stop. Hate has no place in our country, not in London, not anywhere," unquote. Yet how can we reconcile these words with Canada's lacking response to the ongoing genocide? How can we stand against Islamophobia within our borders when seemingly endorsing it through our foreign policy? Canada's support has emboldened an apartheid regime that perpetuates genocide under the veil of warfare. This is beyond politics. This is about humanity. This is about standing firm against an ideology that seeks to erase a people based on their religion and ethnicity. The report we are releasing today is sounding the alarm on the ongoing genocide that demands immediate and principled action. Canada has a clear obligation under international law to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. If Islamophobia has no place in Canada, if hatred must stop, then our support for a regime that perpetuates this hatred cannot remain. I encourage you all to visit the Justice for All Canada website to read this report that shines a light on the atrocities being faced by Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli government and its supporters. Thank you for being here today, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Sam Hersh, a community and political organizer and an active member of the Ottawa chapter of the Independent Jewish Voices.
Thank you. Hello, bonjour, and thank you for being with us here today. Merci pour être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. My name is Sam Hersh, and I'm an active member of the Ottawa chapter of, for Independent Jewish Voices Canada, a nationwide organization with more than 20 chapters across the country. IJV is a grassroots organization grounded in Jewish tradition that opposes all forms of racism and advocates for justice and peace for all in Israel-Palestine. IJV believes that no one should have to choose between embracing Judaism or Jewishness and supporting Palestinian human rights. I'm pleased to be standing here today with Justice for All Canada, an organization that has been at the forefront of speaking out for genocide prevention for Muslims around the world. And as they write at the beginning of the report on Islamophobia, quote, "We are now witnessing a new live genocide occurring in Palestine," end quote. In particular, the report discusses the growing political, social, and academic consensus around genocide in Palestine and how it is linked to anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. The report then makes 11 recommendations, from supporting an arms embargo, a permanent ceasefire, expanding the mandate of the Islamophobia Office, and ramping up urgent humanitarian aid, among other recommendations. All things I would urge our government and opposition parties to support. And on that note, would further urge all members of Parliament to support the NDP motion being put forward on the 18th that is in fact advocating for some of these stated recommendations. Just yesterday, at least 29 more people were killed by Israeli airstrikes, waiting for humanitarian aid, and days before that, hundreds more were killed, waiting for the same thing. These weren't soldiers or military targets. These were innocent men, women, and children waiting desperately for food, water, and other essentials that they have been without for days and weeks at a time for the past 5 months. And this report asks plainly, how can something like that happen so regularly? And the answer is a consistent and systematic dehumanization of Palestinians by important political figures in Israel as well as people around the world. We are fighting human animals, and we will act accordingly. It's time to be cruel. Human animals must be treated as such. There will be no electricity and no water. There will only be destruction. You wanted hell, you will get hell. These are not words from random extremists or far-right internet accounts. These are actual words from the highest-ranking Israeli officials. Quote, "So we'll make sure Gaza will become a happy amusement park. We will blow up your house for free." End quote. These are lyrics to a viral Israeli rap song that has racked up millions of views on YouTube. The mass dehumanization of a people is happening before our eyes, and this isn't only happening in Israel-Palestine, but here as well, as people march in the streets calling for a ceasefire are routinely labeled anti-Semitic and silenced, including here in Ottawa, where many have simply received tickets for just using megaphones. We at IJV have always said that there can be no military resolution to this issue, and this has been proven abundantly true again and again. We were one of the first organizations to call for a ceasefire, as well as the release of all hostages, but at the same time, we reject the use of our identity and Jewishness being used to justify the killing of over 30,000 people. The Canadian government must act now on these 11 recommendations to not only stem the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, but to stop the advancement of what experts and many countries and world leaders agree is a genocide, not in our name. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I would now like to introduce Dr. Yamin Gambian, a member of the Canadian Muslim Healthcare Network.
Imagine your child, the very child you brought into this world. Your child just had a limb blown off in a bomb. You're one of the few doctors left. Your hospital has been bombed. You're forced to perform life-saving surgery on your child without anesthetic. Your child screams. Your child dies while screaming in pain. This is one of the many horrific realities that's happening right now in Gaza. The war in Gaza is a war on children, according to the UNICEF spokesperson, James Elder. Over 13,000 kids killed, many more missing. Over 1,000 children have had at least one limb amputated. Since Israel has cruelly blocked the entry of items like anesthetics, oxygen supplies, and ventilators, many of these children have had these operations, including amputations without anesthetic. The healthcare infrastructure has been purposely targeted and is near collapse. Over 600 attacks on healthcare facilities have been documented by the World Health Organization since the genocide began. The few remaining hospitals are out of medical supplies and drugs. They are barely functioning. The toll on children is horrifying. 17,000 children are orphaned. 17,000. That's the equivalent of 8% of all kids in Ottawa being orphaned. What would you do if 8% of the people, of the children in your city, were orphaned in a span of just 5 months? If the bombs and bullets don't kill the civilians, the starvation likely will, due to a blockade of food, water, and medical supplies, and an intentionally slow processing of critical humanitarian aid at Israeli checkpoints. The lack of clean water has increased disease, dysentery, upper respiratory infections, and severe dehydration. Dozens have already starved to death from this man-made disaster. Here at home, organizations like the Canadian Medical Association, who have been so outspoken on Russia's invasion and occupation in Ukraine, have been silent on Israel's brutal invasion and occupation. The silence is deafening. Many of our healthcare institutions are more concerned with muzzling and intimidating health workers raising their voices against the atrocities in Gaza than the very atrocities themselves. There are numerous appalling accounts of doctors and medical trainees who have been silenced or suspended for speaking out against this genocide. There is also blatant hypocrisy and double standard from many of our Canadian officials. Their Islamophobic beliefs and anti-Palestinian racism have been unveiled. Canadian political leaders are quick to condemn anything that Israel deems hurtful. But aggressions against Palestine or their properties or the people, there's either silence or calls for investigation rather than immediate condemnation. As a Canadian healthcare worker, demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire is not enough. The illegal blockade on Gaza must be lifted. Photo ops of inefficient airdrops must be replaced with unimpeded humanitarian and healthcare aid. Anti-Palestinian racism in our hospitals must be eradicated. Canada must not be silent in the face of this genocide. As South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." Where do we stand as Canadians today?
Thank you, Dr. Yemen. I would now like to introduce Nour Kadri, a professor of strategic innovation and management at the University of Ottawa.
Thank you. On the International Day to Fight Islamophobia, we're doing great in Canada. In fact, we do excellent when we're facing and condemning any racist acts. If somebody draws a swastika in front of a Jewish synagogue, we rightly call that, and justly, as something that is highly condemned and it should never happen. If somebody vandalizes a mosque, and we will see the outpouring condemnation of all politicians as something that is Islamophobic. And this is, yes, rightly and justly done so. But what's more Islamophobic than Israel destroying 1,100 mosques in Gaza? And we don't see any condemnation from the Prime Minister of Canada or the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the majority of the politicians in Canada. We cannot be silent on these atrocities. As an academic, I see what's happening in Palestine, and I look at the systemic and the incremental genocidal acts that are perpetrated by the Israeli right-wing government of Benjamin Netanyahu. More than 200 academics and university professors have been targeted and killed. 11, and there are only 12 universities in Gaza, 11 universities have been completely destroyed and one partially destroyed. Where do we go with the more than 300,000 university students that are entering university in the next year? We don't see any calls for condemnation from the majority of the people around the world. Yet we see elements of this right-wing governments that have called people of Gaza as human animals. We see Ben Gvir, one of the ministers, calling for the arming of illegal settlers by more than 100,000 firearms to kill more Palestinians. More than 3,500 settlements or settlement units have been given the go-ahead by this right-wing government. We see Smotrich, one of the right-wing players, and other ministers calling for throwing a nuclear bomb on Gaza. This is incremental genocide. Yet we don't see the Canadian government taking any major position in sanctioning those ministers, in condemning that right-wing government, like they do in many places without the blink of an eye, for instance, in the case of the Ukraine war. Why don't we do that in Canada. Canada is showing that it is complicit in this incremental genocide that is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank and in all of Palestine. As Canadians, we demand that our government do better, that they think of what's happening in Gaza in terms of the closures of those hospitals. More than 80% of the 36 hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed. The schools, the 737 schools in Gaza, 80% of them have been destroyed. The majority of the rest are being used as shelter for people that have no homes to go to. Where do those students go to? 90% of the population of Gaza are educated. We are looking at preventing education for a generation to come. We demand better from our government. And when accusations of Israel come about UNRWA, the government of Canada cuts funding right away. When the investigations come out a month later, it shows that Israel was asking and forcing some of those members of UNRWA to give statements that they have participated in the October 7 attacks. Israel has been trying to stop UNRWA for more than 2 decades. And the Canadian government should be wary of that situation and aware of that situation, that they should never stop funding for UNRWA on accusations of Israel before any full investigation has been done, just like they do when there is something that concerns Israel on the other side. We cannot be complicit in that genocide. We cannot be apply double standards when it comes to international law. This is not a buffet that we can pick from, and we need to do better. I hope that all members of parliament in Canada will look at the NDP convention, the NDP vote on the 18th, that will address all those important recommendations that the majority of Canadians are asking for. And thank you very much for Justice for All Canada for putting out this report. It is timely, and as Canadians, we need to take it to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you for all of our speakers for our remarks. I'll just like to reiterate that the report should be available at the Justice for All Canada website, and I encourage everyone to read it in depth to learn more about the injustices that Palestinians are facing. So we call on the Canadian government to engage in serious diplomatic efforts to end the root cause of the current conflict, including Israel's 76-year-long apartheid, 57-year-long occupation of Palestinian territories, and 17-year-long blockade on Gaza. We call on the Canadian government to leverage all measures for an immediate, durable, and sustainable ceasefire, and to provide urgent humanitarian aid to organizations like Ottawa. Thank you for being here today, and we'll answer any questions from the press gallery.
You said about Canada using its leverage in the region to bring about a ceasefire. Not to denigrate Canada too much, we don't have a lot of leverage in the region. We've seen issues with them even just trying to get loved ones of Canadians across the border for their program. We did see them, I think, put a pause on approving some non-lethal military transfers. Are there any specific forms of leverage that you think should be applied that Canada isn't using?
I probably could answer that. The Canadian government has forces in Israel that are assisting on the ground there. I don't think they should be there for any reason. The Canadian government can do more in terms of sanctioning. We didn't see any names of settlers that they wanted to sanction. They should sanction ministers in this government, because they have done this in other situations. If somebody says that we're going to throw a nuclear bomb on Israel, okay, they would sanction them. Even without a nuclear bomb, they have sanctioned Iranians for just threatening Israelis. But when Israeli ministers threaten Gaza, they dehumanize the people of Gaza, they should be sanctioned, okay? We are very late on this. And when it comes to arms sales, the government is in a minority situation, and they have been kind of having their arm kind of wrestled many times to take those by the Foreign Affairs critic of the NDP and other pressures from the National Council of Canadian Muslims and the Canadian Arab Federation and other Palestinian supporting and justice supporting groups. Yet Canada, even when they want to do and move on some action, they're just doing this shyly without allowing the government of Israel to feel that we're not supporting you. They properly declared and publicly declared that they're supporting Israel. And this time, they should not be shy. They should call a spade, condemn Israel, condemn its atrocities, and sanction some of those ministers.
So I just wanted to briefly add, two things I would briefly add is one, they could probably better use their leverage on the United States as, being a close partner of the United States and actually, speaking to the high-ranking officials there. Or they can also do what other countries have done and, like recall the ambassador, for example. So I think there's still a lot of steps that the Canadian government can take that they haven't taken yet. So and also obviously there's the, limiting the SIFTA, the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, stuff on that. So there's a lot of levers that still haven't been explored that they could probably look at.
This question is addressed to Professor Kadri. I'm wondering why this whole thing is cast as a Islamophobia narrative, because I've been talking to the Christian minority in Gaza. They're suffering just as much. Churches have been bombed. People taking shelter in churches have been killed, and schools, everything run by Christians have been destroyed. So can you please comment on that?
The Israeli occupation and atrocities have been running for many decades. And Christians face the same dilemma and problems when they want to go and celebrate Christmas at the Church of Nativity. And occupation has no religion. The fact and the idea that we address this from an Islamophobia perspective is that we are taking advantage and looking at this opportunity that it is the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. But I've known that Justice for All Canada, for instance, on International Women's Day, they highlighted what's happening to women in Palestine. I've known that a lot of academics, they're addressing what's happening to academia. A lot of health networks are looking at what's happening to hospitals. Israel is implementing a consistent and an incremental genocide. We, in Canada, as a third country, has been put on notice by the International Court of Justice in the ruling of October 26. And they have to do more in order to prevent this genocide. According to the 1948 Convention on Genocide, Canada must and should take action that is going to prevent genocide because the risk is there. It has been ruled by the International Court of Justice and it doesn't need any academics or researchers or investigations to say that when most schools, most universities, most mosques and churches have been destroyed, the life of the people, the hopes of the people of Gaza have been destroyed. It's not only about Islamophobia, it is about occupation in general and the consequences of that occupation.
I just wanted to add as well to that we don't see it as a religious conflict. I think that's something that everyone really likes to paint that narrative. What we are realizing in that a lot of the things that are being perpetuated by the Israeli government, we're seeing every year during Ramadan, it is the month of Ramadan, we are seeing a targeting of Muslims. There are definitely Islamophobic undertones to their perpetuation of violence by the Netanyahu government, but it's not just a religious conflict. It is something that is affecting Palestinian Christians as equally as well.
Okay, another question. Canada and Sweden have now resumed funding for, what do you pronounce that?
UNRWA.
Oh my God, yes. Okay. Do you think other countries, are you aware of other countries that have followed suit? And
I think Australia is.
Australia?
They might be doing it soon. But
European Union? Any others?
We hope that all of them will resume funding. The problem is that when the Americans stopped the funding based on accusations from Israel, we've seen a lot of countries follow suit. what bothers me with the Canadian government is that they stopped the funding without any investigation just after the United States did. And they resumed the funding probably 36 minutes after the Americans have done so. And we need to have statesmen in this country that do like John Chrétien did on the Iraq war. He told the Americans, no, we're not going to a war in Iraq, because the lie of weapons of mass destruction will not pass the litmus test of the Canadian government. The same thing for the lie, the Israeli lie on UNRWA employees participating in October 7th. This doesn't pass the litmus test, and I hope that the Canadian government does not fall into this mistake again.
More questions? No? Please conclude the press conference. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.